on the wards in Trinidad. I did some private practice in primary care, and at some point in time after practicing for maybe 7 years in Trinidad, around 2017, I started like doing USMLE exams to come to the US and matched to the same program as Dr. Ben, Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. in 2019, where I just finished my 3-year residency in internal medicine. So now I'm an attending physician in the state of Alabama.
Right, thank you. That was good. So while at Howard, Khan actually received a few awards, and he's one of the top presidents there as well. He got Teacher of the Year most recently. I didn't think he mentioned that. And he's also one of the most prolific teachers that we had at Howard, which is why he got that award. Charlotte also has been doing really well. I don't want to spend too much time on that, because today we're going to focus on the interview. Because as Charlotte said, you guys would have already, at least you're thinking about it. For those of you already at the process where you submitted your ERAS application. So this is why we're here today. So I'm going to get back to Sherlyn and Dr. Khan in a few, but just so that you know, there are a couple of types of interviews that you can expect. So from the traditional one-on-one versus like a blended type interview where you have like a mixture of the two. There is a panel interview where you might be just sitting there with you as the only person, and then you have like 4 or 5, maybe 6 doctors who interview you, sometimes just 2. And then it could be a group session where you have maybe just you as well as like another applicant or 2 other applicants, and they just interview you guys together, and then they take you on a one-on-one. So this was mostly the in-person type. Now it's mostly Zoom. So what tends to happen is that you might end up with like a mini interview from one, maybe the program director or someone else in the program. At some programs, the chief residents, they actually, they help with the interview process as well. And during the SOAP, you might encounter just like a video interview or just a phone interview. Before I go on, I don't know, for Sherlyn, just as you mentioned before, Sherlyn mentioned that to prepare, to start early and to practice. I think that's one thing that he was pointing out, so I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Of course. First of all, I didn't know the first statement was the introductory statement. Sorry, because I lost connection for some time. But anyhow, yeah. So yeah, start early. One of the most important things you can do in an interview is prepare. Don't ever think you're going to wing it. Winging it won't work. Okay. There's specific questions that are asked in every single. Yeah, some of the questions are pretty universal, but so you want to cover those at least, right? Prepare. Most programs, they let you know who you're interviewing with. So you kind of do some background research on these people. Like, for example, it can be an endocrinologist, it can be a hospitalist. So you kind of know the conversation, right? What I did, I got like a list of 50 most asked by colleague who was interviewing at the same time. We would just mock interview each other to get comfortable with responding to someone asking you a question. You don't want to be caught in the spot and look dumbfounded because you're not sure of the answer. What we normally did is, and you don't want to sound rehearsed at the same time too, but you want is a thin line between sounding rehearsed and feeling comfortable with responding to a question.
Yeah. So as Sherlyn said, it's important to just practice. I usually advise people to try to get like a little elevated speech. I remember when I was applying the first time, Sherlyn and we actually would practice over the phone because I was in Jamaica at that time and he was in Bahamas, I believe, right? And we would talk, and then you'd be like, okay, so tell me about yourself. What's the elevator pitch? That's actually what we call it. So you should be able to do that within like a nice 1 minute to 90 seconds or so. And that's like something that you should wake up in the night. I usually tell persons maybe for about 2 minutes, you should be able to speak for. Know that there are certain keywords that a program is looking for. So you need to be able to display leadership. And the best way to do any of this is to tell a story. I remember Riyadh, Dr. Khan would always, he would always give us like a lot of stories. He would start and he would tell us about Trinidad and like what work was like there. So you need to talk about some sort of story. So leadership is something, compassion. So every doctor, that should be a given. Empathy, communication. So that's actually something that they're looking for as well. What you should do, and you should start practicing this weeks before your interview, is that you should stop using fillers. So in your everyday speech, avoid using certain terms like, man, these colloquial things, just try to drop some of those because you're coming up to your interview season. I don't know if there's anything, Riyadh, I don't know if you could tell us a bit about maybe some of the common questions that you encountered. You don't have to be too specific, but just give us like an idea of what your interview is like.
Sure. I think the first question they're going to ask is to tell me about yourself, because programs want to get to know you. They want to find out about you and if you're a good fit for the program. Most of the time, they just want to have an idea if you are a normal human being and you're not going to do anything weird if they hire you. They want to see that you have the ability to communicate. They want to see how you would conduct yourself if they ask you a difficult question, that kinds of things. But I think in general, it is possible for you to lead the interview in the way that you would go. From the first time for my interview at Howard, the first question I was asked is, tell me about yourself. And I had, before the interview, thought that, okay, this is something they're going to ask me. I thought about my entire career from primary school, secondary school, medical school, things that I was interested in, things that piqued my research interest, things that I did electives in, my extracurricular activities. I spoke about myself and gave them stories about things that I was doing in the hospital when I was working patients. I saw all sorts of things, and I was speaking so much and telling so many interesting stories that they didn't really have time to ask me any questions. So at the end of it, they were basically saying, okay, we got it, we got it. Like, we know about you. I think we're gonna take you, right? And they let me out the door. So I think if you have like a story, a good story about yourself, and it's making sense and it's interesting and you're funny and it's flowing and people like you, I think they will just let you speak. And similarly with the job interviews, I think I've had similar experiences. Other than asking you about yourself directly, they will ask you standard interview questions like, what are your biggest strengths? And they can ask you what are your biggest weaknesses, which is a little bit more difficult for you to think about because they're different schools of thought. Some people say, okay, we should take a strength and turn it into a weakness. But that technique has been so overdone. I think people just roll their eyes when you hear about it. I think it's better to think of a genuine weakness. Don't say anything horrible about yourself that you're not going to get hired. Don't say, oh, I like to do heroin and cocaine on the weekends. You know what I mean? Say, think of a weakness that you have and show that you are aware of the weakness and what things that you have done to try to overcome this weakness. It shows that you have the ability to self-reflect and you have the ability to improve, which are good traits. Since that all of us are going to be coming from the Caribbean, a very popular question, and I was actually asked this question as well, is why did you decide to leave your cushy home in the Caribbean with the beach and the sand and the sun and decide to come to the United States? What made you, it's a big decision to transport your whole life from one place to another. What made you decide to come to the US? What do you think the US has to offer you? What do you think you have to offer the US? What do you think you have to offer this program? And in a similar line, they could segue into why do you think we should choose you over another resident? They asked me also why this particular program in general. Why did you choose this program? Do you have any friends in this program? They might ask you that. Like, what have you heard about the program? What do you think we have that makes you want to come to this program? So if you're applying to a place, if you know anybody who was there before, you could do that. You can go on their website, look at residents, see if you can contact people and speak to them beforehand. That might be useful and helpful because they would be interested in finding out if you are a good fit for this particular program because they want you to be able to work well with others, work well with the other residents who are already there. They want to find out about you as a person. So it's good to have some extracurricular activities because after they speak about all of the business aspects and your strengths and your weaknesses and who you are and what you want to do, they want to make sure that you are a human being too and you can relate to patients. And they will ask you, like, what do you like to do for fun? Also, they want to make sure that you have the ability to maintain a good work-life balance because residence is a very stressful occurrence. People do have mental breakdowns and they have depression. They want to make sure you have appropriate coping skills. So if you could tell them, okay, I have hobbies, I like to run on the weekends, something that you do. Similarly, you can ask you, how do you cope with stress?
Yeah.
They also tend to ask you questions like, sometimes they'll ask you, okay, have you been practicing medicine before? And a lot of us in the Caribbean have had the experience where we were already working in the Caribbean and we have a lot of home experiences. So then they will ask you, okay, could you tell me about an interesting patient that you had? Could you tell me about an interesting case that you saw, how you managed it? Similarly, they can ask you, have you had a difficult patient? How did you deal with that difficult patient? How did you manage the situation? Have you ever had a disagreement with a work colleague? How did you handle that situation? So these are common questions. I think it's worth a while for these ones to like think in your mind, okay, if they ask me this, what I would say. For me personally, I didn't have like too much preparation compared to other people in terms of interviewing, like practicing interviews with other people, because I think naturally I can speak. So I just in my mind I had like a list of things that about my life that I just went through my life in my head of things I did from childhood to medical school, to now. And I had a list of like anecdotes to tell them, and whatever question they asked me, I was prepared to give an answer that sounded eloquent. So
Excellent. So yeah, everyone is different, so you need to know yourself. I mean, Charlotte knows himself, I know myself, Riyadh knows himself. So you might be the person who can just practice by yourself. I was practicing mostly alone. As Charlotte said, 5, 6 years ago, there wasn't really anyone that we could reach out to and be like, oh, can we practice? So it was literally me calling Charlotte, me practicing in front of a mirror. So if you're that type of person, that's good. But then there's some people who have, you may have some issues in terms of being nervous, and it's just human, or you may just think that it's best if you get some professional help. So you need to know yourself. So Rayad went into a lot. As I said, he didn't get this Teacher of the Year award for anything, right? Like if I allow him, he's just gonna keep going on. The moderators say we have a specific time, so we need to keep going. So there are questions about the candidate, and I'll come to you shortly, Charlene. So they may ask you, tell me about yourself. What do you see as your strengths? Tell me about the case that you found interesting and what you learned from it. I specifically remember that Sharon was actually the person who told me about this, that, they were asking about cases. And I found that very strange because I'm like, this is an interview. You've already seen my step scores. Why is this important? So I need you guys to remember that the fact that you made it to the level of the interview, it means that usually they would have looked at your CV, they would have looked at, your scores, they would have known what you did, what you didn't do. But what you need to do is just to come up with some sort of game plan, or what I call the elevator pitch, and you just get that prepared so that you're ready to answer regardless of where they take you. Now, the medical questions, that's medicine. So you just have to prepare for like the most common things. I remember common things are common. That's something that we all learned in med school. I think, tell me about a time where you made a mistake. Riyadh talked a bit about that. What are you looking for in a program? What do you do with your free time? And it's interesting because Riyadh didn't see these slides, but these are the common questions. And how do you deal with the conflict? So Sherlon, you mentioned that you were able to match the second time around. So questions about your CV and gaps. I think one of the main things is that if you have a gap in your CV, or if you didn't match the first time around, then you need to sit down and say, okay, what did I do wrong? Where can I improve? So I think you were talking a bit about doing step 3 and stuff like that. I don't know if you could maybe talk a bit about.
So
yeah.
there were no one could tell that I had tried, like none of the interviewers could tell that I had tried the first time. I could have just said I was waiting to do step 3 before I applied. No one has no record that you tried, right? Unless they go specifically looking into you as a candidate, right? So you don't have to worry about that. And once you have a job like in medicine or in research or something, there are no gaps in your CV. But if they ask you, if you do end up saying some way that you didn't match the first time, you can just say that you thought, you probably needed some more experience in research, you needed some more experience, like another exam, like step 3. Could say you wanted to do some professional building, like do some courses or something to make yourself a stronger candidate and better physician. That's what I would say. But before we move on, I know we finished it. Tell me about yourself part, right?
Sure.
But something, as you said, not everybody is a good talker like Riyadh and charismatic and all these things. So I find it very useful to have like a structure. But you tell me about yourself. Like you want to keep it personal, professional, but having it flow into each other, like without seeming like separate entities. So that's what I did. Like I started with a good, nice tagline. Like I was born in the only English-speaking country in South America. You know, in fact, I was delivered by my father in my house. That's and it caught your attention from the get-go. So they
Correct.
be, oh, you're a born before arrival baby, and like, yeah, I'm one of those. Yeah, stuff like that. Anyhow, back to the thing here. Yeah, gaps in your CV. Some people are not fortunate to be able to work in clinical medicine or research all the time. Sometimes people just take a break to do something, to move, to take care of the sick parent, or to take a non-medical job to pay some bills that they have. It's life.
Yeah.
But this is where your interview and your personal statement comes in. You try a way to tie it in to account for the gaps in your CV. You don't want to have gaps in your CV, or people normally think the worst when they see unaccounted gaps in your CV.
Yeah.
They can think you were in rehab. I've been told this before, actually. No, I'm serious. Actually, one of the companies I used before is they showed me an article,
Yeah.
and they say, yeah, if you have unaccounted gaps, unaccounted. That's the key word, unaccounted.
That's correct.
Gaps in this, people can think you were in rehab or something like. Yeah, it's very true.
And they look at the gap, in the US. Like I realized when I was, after finishing residency, I think Riyadh had the same issue. You might have just like a 4-week, I think anything over 4 weeks, they consider it a gap in the US. So like in Guyana, when we're done with med school in October, there's November, December. No one starts working until January. So they consider the time that we finish med school to starting a job a gap. So literally, you have to explain everything. So research usually is a good thing, as Sherilyn said. Just look to tie in your CV. And what Sherilyn said initially, is very important. You need to be unforgettable. So when you open with that tagline, no one will forget the baby who was delivered.
Right.
Yeah, and I used, the English-speaking country. I think I mentioned that to some guys before. So that's something also important for people coming from Guyana. You need to find a way to sell your story. So something that they tend to ask about, which I found was very interesting, is that like you've spent about half your life in Guyana or in Jamaica or in Trinidad, and your family is here. Like, if for those who have a family, what was the reason? Why was the disconnect? So you need to really be prepared to answer anything, not just gaps on your CV, but things in your life that they can actually ask about. Some of it is illegal technically, but that's how the game is. Now, moving on a bit, in terms of some challenging questions, I think Sherilyn touched a bit on that. The gaps tends to be a challenging question. Weaknesses tends to be a challenging question. And Dr. Khan already went into this. So tell me about your weaknesses.
Before we move on, Ben,
sure.
I want to make it very clear that trying to use one of those weaknesses that turn to be a strength is a red flag. Like, don't tell me I'm a perfectionist or that is actually a strength. Oh, I don't know. I come across them all the time. I'm a perfectionist. I tend to burn myself out. I get too attached to the bit. Like, certain things are cliche. You just have to try to find a way to find some genuine weaknesses that don't endanger patients' lives.
Yeah, correct. Like, some people come, oh, I'm too caring, or as Sherilyn said, so you need to be careful, because most people will tell you, oh, you try to take a positive thing and spin it. But that's really not the best approach. So we go a bit in depth into this when, so
one time I was told I like to do research for fun. I was like, come on, bro. Who likes to do research for fun?
So one of the common things I see people use is that they say that they're detail oriented, So you need to be careful, because if you say something like that, okay, fine, it could be a weakness, but then you really need to know, what are you trying to say? So I found something that I thought was very interesting. I can be soft-spoken and I like to think through what I say. So I mean, if you're going to use something, you have to be very, very careful that you're not just bluffing, or you're not just using something that's cliche or something that you find on the internet. That's a technique that requires a lot of skill. I was actually asked about my weakness in one of my interviews. So you need to be very, very cautious, as Sheridan is saying, I think as Riyadh said as well. I think one that I used was delegation, because this was actually true for me. Like I literally had issues delegating. And I know I'm not going to call name, but I know someone that I work with who has issues delegating as well. They're like, I don't trust the interns, so I'm not going to ask them to do anything. But for me, I have learned over the years, to learn to delegate, because we have to give everyone the opportunity to grow. And this was actually something that I built upon for my question when they asked me about my weakness. I see that some people say sometimes I find it difficult to delegate. At patient sign out, I'd much rather finish things up myself than let someone else do it. Dr. Khan, would you like to comment about that?
I feel personally singled out here with this one. But yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, this is exactly what I was saying before. Try to think of something that's not too deleterious to patient care, that you can say that is a genuine weakness, and something that you are aware of, and something that you are taking steps to overcome. You have to say that, okay, I'm aware that I have this problem. I'm working to fix this by doing X, Y, and Z.
Correct.
Also, be prepared to give examples. If you can say something, they'll ask you, tell me about the time when you displayed this, or give me an example of a time when you were weak, or whatever,
Yeah.
or some. Always be prepared to give a real life example without lying, because if you lie, then it makes it hard to make it up. Try to let it be as true as possible.
Yeah, and I usually advise people, to speak with stories. When you speak with a story, you are unforgettable. If you start talking about, I'm from the only English-speaking country in Guyana, or I was delivered at home, the amount of candidates that has that story, it's like maybe 1 in 500. So you are going to walk out of that interview being maybe the only person who is delivered at home, the only person who managed to get whatever award from your country, or whatever you want to use as your strong points. So that's something you need to remind. Even when you're talking about weaknesses or any other question, you need to really talk in stories that you'll be remembered for.